Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
President Trump ramps up his war of words in his first speech before the United Nations General Assembly, while singling out terrorism and emphasizing his America First policy. Then one-on-one with President Erdogan. I sit down with Turkey's leader to talk governing after the failed coup and the growing divisions with the U.S. on how to fight terrorism.
We need to fight these terrorists with the United States, and we are not able to acquire those weapons from the United States. Why are you giving weapons to those terrorists is the question that we ask our friends in the United States.
And Mexico rocked by a deadly 7.1 earthquake, bringing buildings down in the densely populated Mexico City. Plus, Hurricane Maria batters the Caribbean, setting its sights on Puerto Rico as the islands brace for the second major Atlantic storm in as many weeks. All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. For President Trump today, a time to press a new worldview and lay down the law. It was his inaugural address to the UN General Assembly. Lisa Desjardins has our report.
His Excellency Donald Trump, President of the United States of America.
At the UN, stepping onto the literal world stage, President Trump spoke with uncompromising words.
As President of the United States, I will always put America first. Just like you, as the leaders of your countries, will always and should always put your countries first.
He had one key word, sovereign, something he said more than 20 times.
Strong sovereign nations let their people take ownership of the future and control their own destiny.
The U.S. will work with other countries, Mr. Trump said, but expects to benefit more from the effort. He outlined a possible doctrine.
We are guided by outcomes, not ideology. We have a policy of principled realism rooted in shared goals, interests, and values. That realism forces us to confront a question facing every leader and nation in this room. We will slide down the path of complacency, numb to the challenges, threats, and even wars that we face? Or do we have enough strength and pride to confront those dangers today so that our citizens can enjoy peace and prosperity tomorrow?
The president painted those dangers in stark and specific strokes.
The scourge of our planet today is a small group of rogue regimes that violate every principle on which the United Nations is based. They respect neither their own citizens nor the sovereign rights of their countries. If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph.
Chief among the wicked few, North Korea, its leader Kim Jong-un, and its missile tests and nuclear explosions. The president was blunt.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing, and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary.
The president next turned to Iran, lambasting recent missile tests and its relationship with the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah.
We cannot let a murderous regime continue these destabilizing activities while building dangerous missiles, and we cannot abide by an agreement if it provides cover for the eventual construction of a nuclear program.
Monitors have found Iran is sticking to the terms of the nuclear deal, but Mr. Trump warned again the U.S. might pull out.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment to the United States, and I don't think you've heard the last of it, believe me.
In all, the president singled out 5 nations: North Korea, Iran, Syria, and in this hemisphere, Cuba and Venezuela.
We are prepared to take further action if the government of Venezuela persists on its path to impose authoritarian rule on the Venezuelan people.
This was part of a broader theme, a return to a pointed, ardent defense of democracy versus socialism.
From the Soviet Union to Cuba to Venezuela, wherever true socialism or communism has been adopted, it has delivered anguish and devastation and failure.
Later, Venezuela's foreign minister complained the speech smacked of a bygone era.
This return to the Cold War. For a moment, we didn't know if we were listening to President Reagan in 1982 or to President Trump in 2017.
Iran's foreign minister, Javad Zarif, joined in the criticism. In a tweet, he called the Trump address hate speech.
While America will pursue
Overall, the president's speech was a vision of self-interest and nationalism across the world.
Are we still patriots? Do we love our nations enough to protect their sovereignty and to take ownership of their futures?
The president said history will tell whether the leaders are up to the task. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
In another major story today, an earthquake shook central Mexico, knocking down buildings and killing at least 61 people. The quake measured 7.1 and was centered about 75 miles southeast of Mexico City. Richard Ensor is the Mexico City bureau chief for The Economist magazine. We spoke just a short time ago by telephone. Richard Ensor, thank you very much for talking with us. What are you seeing? What is the very latest from Mexico City?
So I'm just outside of Mexico City in a town called Cuernavaca, which is much closer to where the epicenter of this earthquake was. And there are collapsed buildings. There are rescue operations underway. I'm currently outside one right now, and there's a lot of activity. People, there's a tall building where the dome of the building has fallen off and crushed a bus, and it seems that people, nobody seems to know whether there are going to be any people inside the building, but it's a very, very somber occasion, and this area is incredibly shocked, especially after having 2 earthquakes in such short time.
We know this is a very populated area, of course, Mexico City itself and the area around it. What did you feel?
So I felt this, in fact, a lot stronger than I did the previous one, even though the Richter scale was in 7.1, the magnitude, rather than 8.2 2 weeks ago. I was in a place with a school with a swimming pool, and I saw the swimming pool splashing around and moving from side to side. The buildings were groaning loudly, and of course the students in the school were incredibly scared.
We're seeing images of people in the streets looking pretty frightened. How are people handling this right now? And is the country prepared in any way to deal with this crisis?
Well, this one is going to hit some of the population centers like Mexico City a lot harder than the previous earthquake did, because the epicenter is so close. There are areas in Mexico City that are built on very shallow and soft ground, so the buildings are prone to coming down very easily. One of the things that was commented on after the previous earthquake was that a lot had been learned since the horrible earthquake in 1985, which killed 10,000 people, and that a lot of lessons about building regulations and emergency response had been learned. This is a stronger earthquake, so we'll have a real test of how the country's emergency services hold up. I know that President Peña has been very active on social media, putting out information and drawing together a national plan of action. On the ground here in Morelos, the epicenter of the quake, the local services are working as hard as they can to find any survivors in the rubble as well.
Richard Ensor, the Mexico City bureau chief for The Economist magazine, thank you very much, and we wish you the best.
Thank you.
As this afternoon's earthquake struck Mexico, another hurricane, Maria, was blasting the northern Caribbean. It is a Category 5, the strongest on the scale, and in its wake, there is major destruction and at least 1 death. Howling winds of 160 miles an hour and driving rain battered the tiny targets of Guadalupe and Dominica during the night. Before being rescued, Dominica's Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerritt, posted live updates from his home, describing the merciless winds and saying, "We pray for its end." Then, minutes later, "My roof is gone. I am at the complete mercy of the hurricane. House is flooding." Today, all communications were cut with Dominica, and on Guadalupe, people waded through floodwaters several feet deep, with cars and buildings partly submerged. As night came on, the storm roared toward the U.S. Virgin Islands. Just days after Hurricane Irma's destruction forced more than 2,000 people to evacuate to Puerto Rico. Maria is on track to pass directly over St. Croix in the Virgin Islands overnight and then slam into Puerto Rico by early tomorrow morning. Puerto Rico avoided much of Irma's wrath, but still suffered an estimated $1 billion in damage. Now, much worse may lie in store. Weary residents on Puerto Rico had just started to clear debris and unboard homes after Irma.
Puerto Rico is not prepared for this. We're going to have a bad time of it. We ask Almighty God that we get through this without serious damage.
Meanwhile, Hurricane Jose rolled up the Atlantic today, spinning off rip currents and big waves along the U.S. East Coast. It is not expected to come ashore. Hurricane Irma devastated the U.S. Virgin Islands, and now they sit directly in Maria's path. Kenneth Mapp is governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands. We spoke by phone a short time ago. Governor Kenneth Mapp, thank you very much for talking with us. Coming so soon after Hurricane Irma, how are you preparing? How are you trying to make sure people are safe?
We need them to really anticipate that they're going to have some roofs breached, maybe some windows blown out. You're going to get wet. You're going to lose your personal belongings. But what we want you is to be safe. And we just went through that 12 days ago on the island of St. Thomas and St. John with a Cat 5 called Hurricane Irma. We were pleased that notwithstanding the devastation, we did not see any marks, a number of folks with trauma, broken bones, cuts and gashes, and our loss of life still remains at 4. And so on St. Croix, we're literally doing the same thing all over again, except for the southern part of the U.S. Virgin Islands.
At this hour, Governor Mapp, what is your main worry?
Protection of folks, protection of life. Folks are off the street. We've got the shelters open. Folks are in the shelter. And so my biggest priority at this moment and for the next 8 hours is the protection of their lives and their safety.
Well, Governor, we wish you and all the people of the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the very best as you try to withstand this storm in the coming hours. Best of luck, and we'll talk to you on the other side.
Thank you, Judy. Take care. Thank you.
Puerto Rico dodged the worst of Irma, but now faces a direct hit from Maria. Ricardo Rosella is Puerto Rico's governor. Governor Rosello, thank you very much for talking with us. Dire warning from your public safety commissioner telling people if they live in wooden or flimsy houses to get out or they're going to die.
This is the strongest storm that Puerto Rico will face in over a century. So the danger is real, and the comments made by our officials were directed at making people aware that this is not your average storm. This is going to have grave impact on infrastructure. It's going to provoke a lot of flooding, sustained winds of 160 miles an hour. So we wanted to make sure people were really aware and cognizant of the need to move to one of our 500 shelters or other family shelters, but to be safe. And once the storm passes, we can start the rebuilding process in Puerto Rico.
Are people following those directions? Are you feeling confident about how prepared you are?
There is typically sort of a late exponential push of people coming into the shelters. Right now, I'm happy to start seeing those flow in. You know, we have a dashboard that starts tabulating all of the people that are going in. In the onset, we were a little bit nervous, as with Hurricane Irma. but surely and quickly right now, people are flocking in, and it's for the best, really. We haven't faced a storm of the ferocity that this storm possesses, and it's better to be safe than sorry, and either lose a loved one or lose one's life in this process.
We know that Puerto Rico has been under some financial strain in recent years. Is that in any way affecting your ability to be ready for this?
Not at all. We know what priorities are, and our priority right now is to make sure that we save people's lives.
Governor Ricardo Rossello, thank you very much, and we wish you the very best in the hours to come.
Thank you, Judy.
In the day's other news, Senate investigators canceled a private interview with President Trump's attorney, Michael Cohen, in the Russia connection probe. Leaders of the Intelligence Committee complained that Cohen violated an agreement by releasing a public statement beforehand. Later, they invited him to testify in public. The lawyer left the Capitol after 90 minutes and offered no details about what had happened.
It was a request by the Senate Intel to postpone, and I'll be back, and I look forward to giving all the information that they're looking for.
Cohen's statement said that a proposal to build a Trump Tower in Moscow as the presidential campaign was starting last year was, quote, solely a real estate deal and nothing more. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported that former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort has been told to expect an indictment. Special counsel Robert Mueller is investigating Manafort's contacts in Ukraine and Russia. Senate Republicans appear to gain momentum today in a last-ditch effort to overhaul Obamacare. South Carolina's Lindsey Graham and Louisiana's Bill Cassidy are pushing a bill to give so-called block grants to states to cover some health care costs while reshaping and cutting Medicaid. They claim today that they are close to getting the votes over staunch Democratic opposition.
At the end of the day, I really believe we're going to get 50 Republican votes. And I make a prediction. There are going to be a lot of Democrats struggling with a no vote because at least eight of them, their states do far better than Obamacare in terms of funding, and they have more control over the money, and that's going to be a hard no.
No guarantee of pre-existing condition, and an end to Medicaid as we know it. Tens of millions of people could well lose coverage. People who desperately need essential services would lose it. Our Republican colleagues don't seem to care about how this affects the average American.
Vice President Mike Pence met with Senate Republicans today and said that the Trump administration is all in on the plan. Turkey has stepped up a show of force along its border with northern Iraq. It's aimed at discouraging Iraqi Kurds from holding an independence referendum on Monday. Dozens of Turkish tanks and rocket launchers took up position today. The Turks also staged airstrikes on Kurdish militants. Ankara fears that the vote will embolden Turkey's own Kurdish population. We will hear from the Turkish president right after the news summary. In Myanmar, leader Aung San Suu Kyi gave her first national address on the flight of 420,000 Rohingya Muslims into Bangladesh. The Rohingyas say they are fleeing attacks by Myanmar's military. Suu Kyi, a Nobel Peace Laureate, condemned any human rights violations. She did not address UN claims that her Buddhist nation is engaged in ethnic cleansing.
We are concerned to hear that numbers of Muslims are fleeing across the border to Bangladesh. We want to find out why this exodus is happening. We would like to talk to those who have fled as well as to those who have stayed.
Suu Kyi invited international diplomats to visit Myanmar and see the situation for themselves, but her speech drew a lukewarm response at the UN General Assembly. In economic news, the once giant chain Toys R Us filed for federal bankruptcy protection today. The company said it is more than $5 billion in debt. It is the latest big box retailer to be pushed aside by growing online sales. And on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 39 points to close at 22,370. The Nasdaq rose 6, and the S&P 500 added 2. Recep Tayyip Erdogan has led Turkey since 2003, first as prime minister and since 2014 as president, an office he has remade into the nation's preeminent leader. Turkey has been an ally of the U.S. for decades, but that alliance is now tense. A main source of division, U.S. support for Syrian Kurdish militia known as the YPG and its related organization, the PYD, which the U.S. is helping fight ISIS in Syria. Both groups are allies of Erdogan's sworn enemy in Turkey, the PKK, a Kurdish separatist group. There are also concerns about the state of Turkish democracy. In the wake of last year's coup attempt, Erdogan says the FETÖ organization orchestrated it. That is his term for a group run by a former ally, Fethullah Gulen. He lives in Pennsylvania, another source of tension with the U.S. Erdogan spoke today at the UN, and he will meet with President Trump on Thursday. I sat down late yesterday afternoon with him in New York for an exclusive interview. President Erdogan, thank you very much for talking with us. You're here to speak to the United Nations and to an American audience. What should the American people know about the state of Turkey-United States relations right now?
Of course, Turkey's relations with the United States date back to a long time in history. We've been enjoying very serious relations throughout history within the framework of this strategic partnership. And all throughout the years, this process successfully sustained our strategic partnership, peaking within NATO. We are together. We're allies within NATO, and Turkey is one of the founding members of NATO. And the strategic partnership was then converted into a model partnership, and we've been enjoying a cooperation in that regard.
I ask this because there's some tension in the relationship right now. Just today, it's reported that the Trump administration has decided not to allow the sale of guns and other weapons to your presidential guards. Is this a problem? What does it say about the relationship between Turkey and the U.S.?
This is a question that I'll be talking about when I get together with President Trump on the 21st. And these are all rumors. There are no statements. And these rumors are not very healthy rumors. I just want to address the audience and state the following openly. In Syria, the PYD terrorist organization is present, and the YPG is there as well. And there are extensions of the PKK separatist organization in Turkey, and we are all fighting these extensions of the PKK. I know that the United States officially recognized the PKK as a terrorist organization. However, as long as that is the case, the PYD or YPG, which are extensions of the PKK, I don't think it is the right move to fight Daesh and Raqqa with those groups. That fight can be conducted with us. But I think it's wrong for the United States to fight terrorism with the YPG or PYD. This is something I've shared with the higher echelons of the United States. We need to fight these terrorists with the United States, and we are not able to acquire those weapons from the United States. Why are you giving weapons to those terrorists is the question that we ask our friends in the United States.
The United States, as you know very well, has been saying it depends on the Syrian Kurds to lead the fight, be an important part of the fight against ISIS. So are you saying unless the U.S. stops working with the Syrian Kurds, that is a deal breaker in the relationship between Turkey and the U.S., or is there some accommodation here possible?
Well, we should not mix one thing with another. First and foremost, this issue has got nothing to do with Kurds. We're just talking about terrorist organizations. Some of the Kurds in the northern parts of Syria are involved in terrorism, and they are to be called terrorists. And some of them are moderate, and they have positive relations with Turkey, and they defend to maintain those positive relations via Turkey. Both of them should not be confused with another, or else we will have different interpretations of the issue in Turkey. I want to highlight this fact because we're not against the Kurds. We are against the terrorist organization, and Kurds are our friends.
So you are saying that there is an accommodation possible. After Raqqa falls, which many expect it to do, after ISIS is driven out of Raqqa, is there an agreement and understanding between Turkey and the United States about who will be in charge and what role will the YPG play? Will other groups play in that area, the Syrian Democratic Forces?
Whatever the stance we had embraced via the terrorist organizations on a global scale will be exactly the same views of the YPG, and especially the name Daesh, should not be confused with the others. We are fighting Daesh in a very committed fashion and very seriously. We have killed more than 3,000 Daesh terrorists. But we are very saddened to see the following. We are trying to eradicate one terrorist organization using another terrorist organization as a vessel. Right now, the United States is working with the YPG in order to eradicate Daesh. The United States is using YPG as the land forces to fight Daesh. But instead, we said we could be of help there. We are Turkey, and we could do that. Let's walk hand in hand.
While we're talking about the Kurds next door in Iraq, there could be a time in the near future when there is a separate Kurdish state. There will be a referendum, it appears. Can Turkey live with an independent Kurdish state in Iraq?
Well, let me be very clear in my remarks. First and foremost, since day one, we've always defended the territorial integrity of Iraq, even though nobody else seems to be doing the same. This referendum should not be conducted. How can we accept a referendum as Turkey when we have a borderline of 350 kilometers of Iraq? Iran doesn't seem to agree. The federal state doesn't seem to agree with the referendum, so how can you make a decision all by yourself as the northern part of Iraq? We do not accept this decision.
Syria, we were talking about. Russia is a major player in Syria. Just last week, you announced a multi-billion-dollar deal to buy surface-to-air missiles from Russia. Why? And is this a contravention of your commitment to NATO, which you're a longtime member of?
We've asked for those weapons from many NATO allies, primarily the United States, but we were turned down. That's why we have to resort to other means, because these systems are very important in terms of our defense. We've had discussions and deliberations with Russia, and Russia is willing to support us all the way to a possible joint manufacturing of these missiles. It's quite natural for us to take decisions on our own self-defense mechanisms. The Secretary General of NATO officially declared that every country had the discretion to make up their own mind and take the necessary measures.
Does this mean that you cannot rely on NATO for your defense? And NATO was partly created to defend against Russia, in opposition to Russia. So is Turkey now closer to Russia or closer to NATO? Where do you place Turkey in that divide?
Turkey is a very powerful member of NATO. And why are you standing against such a member of NATO as Turkey? We are going to pay for these weapons and acquire them. But terrorists are being supplied these weapons free of charge. 3,000 trucks carrying these weapons were provided for these terrorists, and we, as a legitimate member, failed to acquire those weapons, and we had requested to acquire Predators or drones from the United States, and for many years we have never received them. We were not supplied drones, but terrorists are being supplied all those drones and all those weapons. This is unacceptable, and we have to take care of ourselves.
Turkey has for many years sought membership in the European Union. Are you still interested in joining? I say so because there's been a dispute recently. Chancellor Merkel of Germany has said this shouldn't happen. Is Turkey still interested in being part of the EU?
Has the EU decided to admit Turkey as a full member? They should come up with a statement. Are they going to take us in or not? We are ready for everything and anything, so long as they tell us what they're going to do. We are very sincere, and we expect the exact same from the EU, to be sincere. But I don't know to what extent we'll be able to tolerate this lingering on. But I think this can only be tolerated to a certain level, and after that threshold, I think Turkey will come to the point where we have to make our own decision.
One of the sources of tension, great sources of tension between Turkey and the EU, Turkey and the United States, has been the strength of the democracy in Turkey. Your moves before and especially after the coup attempt in the summer of last year. Many people in Turkey, in the government, in the military, in the journalism field, reporters and others, have either lost their jobs or have been in prison, in jail. The question from the United States, from many in the US and in Europe, is this the permanent course for Turkey? Or is this temporary. You have said these people are terrorists. They were attempting to overthrow your government, but many of them are school teachers, low-level government workers, news reporters, and I think it's hard for people in the West to understand why you believe so many of them are terrorists.
Why are you not calling terrorists what they are? That's what I'm curious about. Call terrorists terrorists. And secondly, in our country, a terror act involving many individuals with the eventual goal of toppling the government is subject to legal measures to be taken against them, to which we are committed to staying in the future, because these individuals have infiltrated into law enforcement, into the armed forces. They were wearing their uniforms, but they had their terrorist agendas in their minds, and they have infiltrated into the police force, into the ministries of the state. There are many echelons within those institutions, bearing titles, having different agendas. All of these individuals are subject to prosecution, and their agendas are being identified as a result of the judicial process. The democracy is quite strong in Turkey. Looking at the number of votes cast throughout the elections, you will see that the turnout was around 80 to 85%, demonstrating that democracy is quite powerful in Turkey. Tayyip Erdogan became the president of the Republic of Turkey with 52% of the public vote within the first round of the elections. I was elected as the president, and I'm being called a dictator. However many media outlets in the West, in the United States, I'm being defamed, and they are being very disrespectful. We are receiving the full support of our people, and we are continuing down our path.
Under President Trump, this administration, there have been charges filed against some of your presidential security detail because of an incident that happened in Washington this summer when you were visiting outside the residence of the ambassador. You've disagreed with these charges. You've said the U.S. judicial system is corrupt. Again, fundamental disagreement. How can you get along with President Trump? How can you do business with President Trump when there is this fundamental disagreement over what happened that day?
I'm very sorry about that. Actually, President Trump called me about a week ago about this issue. He said that he was sorry, and he told me that he was going to follow up on this issue when we come to the United States within the framework of an official visit. The protesters were insulting us, and they were screaming and shouting. The police failed to intervene properly, and similar protests were seen around the White House as well when we were inside of the embassy residence. The protesters were very close to my car, to my vehicle. The PKK terrorists and the FETÖ terrorists were protesting. These police officers were officers of the state, not the federal government, but they are in charge of maintaining safety around me and security. They failed to do that. And of course, that would be the moment when my personal security would come to my aid and make sure that everything was safe and secure around me. I'm going to get together with President Trump on Thursday, and I'm going to talk about these developments in a very extensive fashion. I hope and pray that justice will be served as soon as possible, because I know that the United States is very sensitive in terms of judiciary and in terms of the rule of law and the legal aspects. And there will be many other things that we will discuss with President Trump on Thursday.
And finally, President Erdogan, I understand there are many Turkish nationals living now in the United States. I think over 1 million live here in this country. Do you have a message for them? Have they made the right decision to live in the United States, to work here?
I hope and pray that the U.S. administration and the Turkish descendants will build a bridge between us, and they should sustain this relationship on and on.
President Erdogan, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you.
We return now to the legacy of the Vietnam War and a story of one woman whose pilot father was shot down over neighboring Laos. She went on a mission to find the place where he died and some measure of comfort. A new film lays out her odyssey along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Special correspondent Mike Saray, a Vietnam veteran himself, reports.
I don't have any of my own personal memories of my dad. I mean, he left when I was very young. We have very few photos, really just 1 or 2 of me with him as a baby.
Rebecca Rush's father, Steve, was shot down in Laos in 1972 while flying a bombing mission over the Ho Chi Minh Trail near the end of the Vietnam War. He was listed as MIA, missing in action most of her life.
This is my remembrance. This is my dad's crash coordinates, the place really where my life changed. They're the military navigation coordinates that we received years ago, and it's also a remembrance that he's still a part of my life.
Rebecca, an Idaho firefighter and endurance mountain bike racer, has spent most of her life wondering about what happened to the father she never had a chance to know. He left for Vietnam when she was only 3 years old.
I'm attached to Vietnam and Southeast Asia for the rest of my life, and I've been attached through my dad my entire life. I just hadn't really recognized the depth of it until now. There's a place I've been avoiding for a long time. It's been in my thoughts for more than 40 years. What happened there long ago set me on this path.
Rebecca rode nearly 1,200 miles, the length of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, to visit her father's crash site, both as a memorial tribute to him and for some possible closure to her family's Vietnam experience the past 45 years. Her journey, along with a Vietnamese mountain bike racer, was documented in the theatrical film Blood Road.
They call it Blood Road because so many people died there, and countless Americans, countless Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodian, and knowing that we were going to travel that path of history, but also that path of death, was very somber. You okay, Yuan? Okay. Okay. There was trepidation about what we're going to find in the jungle, but also this deep sense of remorse and sadness for what this trail represented.
This critical network of roads, trails, and footpaths through Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia was used by the North Vietnamese to move troops and supplies to fight in South Vietnam. It was heavily bombed by the Americans.
I really didn't expect to see so many bomb craters and the land to still be pockmarked with representation of the devastation that happened there. I didn't expect to see so many physical remnants of the war while we were riding, and this included a boat that we took that was a fuel fuselage from an F-4 Phantom, the same plane that my dad flew. Whoa.
She also didn't expect to be greeted so warmly by villagers once they understood her family's connection to the decade-long bombing campaign that claimed many of their family members.
If someone had come to my house and her dad had been dropping bombs on my family and she came and knocked on my door, would I be as open and welcoming and say, come on in, I want to help you on your mission? Sadly, I don't think that I would be that open, and it's a big lesson to take from them on forgiveness and getting past the painful history.
The son of the villager who saw her father's plane crash in 1972 took her to the site in the jungle where his father buried her father next to a large tree.
Picking around in the dirt with his machete, he actually found parts of the plane. Finding those pieces and actual remnants made it very real and made it, that this really is the place where Dad was, and that's his gravestone for me.
There's very few pictures of you and him.
Yeah, this is the one.
Instead of closure, Rebecca's journey opened a new chapter in her Vietnam War history, one inspired by how her father signed off one of his last letters home to his family.
I love the flying and the airplane, but I don't really like the job. Regardless of any opinions I have of this war or any other, I try to rationalize and say it has to be done, but I can't see any reason why. If anything should happen to me, please don't let me die. Be good, Steve. And your hands? Here? Ready?
Rebecca has gone back to Laos since her initial ride to keep her father's memory alive, as well as those of the local casualties of the war, whose numbers continue to grow due to UXOs, the unexploded ordnance, that is still injuring another generation of Lao.
2 of the fingers were cut off.
The United States government estimates that 20 to 30% of the bombs dropped here did not go off as designed. As a result, there may be tens of millions of unexploded ordnance littered around the landscape.
So this one is safe?
Yeah, it's safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's safe too.
This one's safe too.
To help pay for the clearing of the land of this dangerous legacy of the war, Rebecca is working with local artisans and the New York jewelry company Article 22 on recycling metal from UXOs and parts of downed aircraft like her father's. A portion of the sales goes to UXO cleanup.
The bracelets I've had engraved with, in my dad's handwriting, the way that he signed his letters home, the words "Be Good." And on the opposite side, in my handwriting, is the Lao translation of "Be Good." And really it does represent a combining of the two cultures and my trip over there. The bracelet is not just about my dad or my story or even one person. It's, you know, there were millions who lost their lives there, and we can look back at our history and be embarrassed or devastated by it or ashamed by it, but then it's up to us to actually do something to create a better future, and that's what's happening with my trips back and my partnership with Article 22 and taking mountain bike groups back there. Is I feel a responsibility to be part of the change.
For the PBS NewsHour, Mike Saray reporting from Shinquan Province, Laos.
Next, we conclude our special education series, Rethinking College. Tonight, how one university offers customized learning to fit the busy lives of non-traditional students. Hari Srinivasan has our report, part of our weekly segment, Making the Grade.
Terrence Burley lives on the Navajo Reservation in northern Arizona, a place where college often seems beyond the horizon.
I wanted to go to college, and it didn't work out.
Only 7% of residents on the reservation get college degrees.
It wasn't my main issue. You know, my parents weren't really making a lot of money.
Now a 42-year-old father, Terrence is pursuing his bachelor's degree, hoping to advance his career in computer technology.
I want to make myself more marketable. Good try.
Burley is using federal grants to pay tuition at Northern Arizona University, a campus that's 160 miles away. He's enrolled in an unusual online program called Personalized Learning. Rita Chang is the president of Northern Arizona University.
Personalized learning is a perfect approach to students who may have competency they have gained from their work experience. It is a demonstration of mastery.
The program allows Terrence to quickly move through college courses because it's based on a subscription, like Netflix. Students pay one flat fee every 6 months and take as many courses as they have time for.
If they can master something very quickly, they can speed through segments of the curriculum.
Terrence is studying information technology, and as a software administrator, he's been able to use what he's learned on the job to advance.
The courses re-emphasizes what you know already. I'm tested for my competency. If I pass my test, I'm able to pass my courses. You want this?
He must still take the core curriculum required of all on-campus university students.
So what are some of the advising challenges that you've seen?
Corey Gordon is the coordinator for NAU's Personalized Learning Program.
Everything is online, and it was all curated by a professor. We'll use online textbooks, we use videos, we use case studies, we use simulations, interactive software. What's different about us, though, is the students really have the keys. So everything is available when the student starts, and they determine when they're ready to move on to the next concept. They determine when they're ready to take the test.
How's the school coming along?
It's fine. But there are challenges with Terrence Burley's remote learning. He lives in his mother's house, which currently has no electricity or internet.
I use my cell phone to get connected, and on a good day, I usually get 2 bars.
When his laptop runs out of power, Burley recharges it by plugging into his truck, and his day is long.
Usually, I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, be on the road by 4:30 a.m. I get home By 6 p.m., I start my class again from 8 p.m. up to 10 p.m.
There are so many working adults. This allows students to go at their own pace, balance their family, work, and stay on the job, demonstrate what they've learned in their career, and complete the degree.
This is a very special day.
Northern Arizona University was the first public college to receive accreditation and federal aid for 4-year degree students who can move through courses by proving competencies. But the program is still very small. So far, only 172 students have graduated. Selena Larson is one of them. Selena graduated on the same day as her 22-year-old daughter, Raven.
I kept crying. I know.
Larson decided on personalized learning after her daughter began classes at NAU's Flagstaff campus.
I said, you know what, I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to finish before you.
Larson did graduate before Raven by 5 hours.
Here's my hero graduating from college, and 5 hours before you.
Larson did all the coursework for a liberal arts bachelor's degree at their family home in Phoenix. It took her 3 years.
I did appreciate having my own timeline. I think that gives you a lot of control, but you have to be very motivated.
The university points to anecdotal success stories, but there's been little research to show if this new way of learning benefits students. And for Larson, the process wasn't always easy. There were technical glitches.
There could be a struggle with software where something just went wrong and it doesn't open and you can't get in and their IT can't help you. So you're going around in circles sometimes. There's no office to go to talk to somebody.
President Chang acknowledges early problems with the software, but says technology has been improving.
Every year we're getting better with the technology, and NAU has always been known to adapt to the latest in technology, and we will continue.
President Chang herself was a non-traditional student, relying on the U.S. Post Office and correspondence courses for much of her college work.
I spent 7 years in 5 universities getting a bachelor's degree. Affordability and access were always important to me.
For Selena Larson, the bachelor's degree has given her new confidence.
We're just this huge, prideful family right now. I'm so proud of you. She was super, super proud. I don't know that it changed how she saw me, but I know that she has like this huge sense of pride that I have in her, now she has in me.
And while Terrence Burley estimates he still has 2 years to go, he believes a bachelor's degree is finally within reach.
I just take it course by course and eventually I'll get there.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Hari Srinivasan.
Finally tonight, a former professional athlete takes on color divisions in sport. Jeffrey Brown has our look from New York as part of our Race Matters series.
A beautiful late summer day on the grounds of the U.S. Open at Flushing Meadows, New York, tennis's biggest stage in this country. The kind of day that can stir memories.
This place is so special to me because I was a fan here first.
James Blake was born in Yonkers to an African-American father and white British mother. He started playing tennis at 5 alongside his brother Thomas, who also became a professional player.
I grew up an hour from here. I was born less than 30 minutes from here. I was getting autographs at the qualifiers. And
you did as a kid?
Yeah, I snuck in.
They haven't come after you to get
They haven't come after me. I
yet,
think I still owe them about $20 or $30 from back tickets.
Blake more than repaid the sport, becoming a top American star, known for his speed and his power. He climbed to the world number 4 ranking in 2006 and retired in 2013 after a 14-year career. 2 years later, awaiting a ride from his Manhattan hotel to be a commentator at the U.S. Open, Blake was thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and arrested by a plainclothes New York City police officer. It was caught on a surveillance camera, a case of mistaken identity for which the New York Police Commissioner publicly apologized.
My apologies for the incident which he found himself involved in.
But one that drew national headlines and charges of excessive force and racial profiling.
They've got you cuffed. You don't know what's going on. I know I had done nothing wrong, but while that's going on, you just feel so weak and ineffective because they are totally in control of the situation, and they know that. And some of them handle that situation well, some don't. And the officer that handled this case was not handling it well.
I assume that you had never experienced anything like that.
Not to that extent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think almost every person of color at some point in their life has been profiled, whether it be walking into a store or driving your car and you're pulled over for no reason or anything to that extent. So I've had instances like that, but never physical violence like this.
The incident caused Blake to rethink his own role as a citizen athlete. He began to speak out about cases of police misconduct and now has a new book about the efforts of other athletes, Ways of Grace, stories of activism, adversity, and how sports can bring us together.
I want to see some positive headlines about athletes, and that's what I try to do in this book and show that there are athletes that have a social conscience, that aren't just there for the 3 hours that you watch them on TV. They have lives, they have things that are important and that they're passionate about. But I think so many people focus on LeBron James, was he selfish to go to Miami? Was he selfish here? Well, you know what? The guy donated $40 million to education in Akron, in his community, and realizing that education is one of the biggest barriers for income disparity.
Blake writes of many athletes, including from his own sport, lesser known such as Amir Haddad and Asamul Haq Qureshi, an Israeli Jew and Pakistani Muslim, who played doubles together at Wimbledon in 2002 and beyond in the face of opposition. And more famous names, Arthur Ashe, who spoke out about apartheid and championed civil rights, as well as support for those with HIV/AIDS, which he himself battled. And Billie Jean King, who has accomplished so much for gender equality and social justice in tennis and beyond. And he writes with sympathy for the most controversial figure today, former San Francisco 49er quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who publicly took a knee during the national anthem before games last year to protest police brutality. He's now out of football, and Blake and others believe it's because of his public stance.
People are criticizing, saying, oh, he makes $15 million, he should just shut up and play. And I just always have hated that narrative, because it doesn't matter the amount of money that's being paid, you still shouldn't be able to control someone, because then it's just a matter of saying, at what stage are you selling your whole soul? You're selling all your beliefs for a certain amount of money, and I think Colin Kaepernick is showing that he's not for sale.
But do you understand fans who would say, look, I love and support you, Colin Kaepernick, or athlete XYZ, for what you do on the field, but that's what you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
That's your job.
Yeah, and
don't push your politics on me.
Yeah, well, fans are absolutely within their right to not go to the game, to say, I'm not going to buy your jersey, to do anything like that. But I don't think it's really fair to put that on him, because of what he's fighting for. Is a lot of veterans have said that's what we fought for. He has this freedom, and people say, oh well, you know what, we want sports just to get away from politics. We want it just to be an escape. Well, it can be an escape for when it's on the field and he's still doing his job on the field, but when he's not forced to be on the field, you know, it's up to him. It's his right, and it's his freedom of speech that he can say and do what he wants, especially since it's peaceful.
Do you think there's more responsibility with the higher profile you are? Because you think about very famous stars of the past, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Bill Russell, people who spoke out. You think of Michael Jordan, who some people criticized him for not, right? Being more connected with the brands and the advertising.
Well, again, I think it's individual, and I think we talk about it in the book with the fact that there was a little bit of an era where a lot of people weren't speaking out. Michael Jordan was in that era where it was, you're going to protect your brand at all costs. So I think a lot of people in that time were going to be silent, and they were just going to try to sell shoes. I don't fault them for that, but I feel like it's shifted. So now, especially with social media, people are going to speak out. And I think previous to that generation, there was the generation of Muhammad Ali, there was the civil rights movement, there were people that stood for a serious cause, and it seemed like athletes maybe thought, hey, we've got it good now, let's not mess this up.
As for himself,
Thanks.
Blake settled a lawsuit against the New York Police Department this summer and got the city to fund a legal fellowship.
That was a good outcome. Exploring the case of police misconduct, you have a fellow on staff for the next 6 years, 2 years at a time, so there'll be 3 different ones straight out of law school to fight these kind of cases, because last year over 50% of them weren't seen to conclusion. So now there's someone on staff to help them see these cases through to the end, get whatever payout, get whatever accountability is necessary for the police officers. It's a start. It's not the end of the story.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in Flushing Meadows, New York.
And a news update before we go. As rescuers dig through rubble, the death toll from the 7.1 magnitude earthquake that shook central Mexico this afternoon has risen to at least 94, and it is expected to climb. Centered about 75 miles southeast of Mexico City, the quake caused numerous buildings to collapse. Today is the anniversary of a 1985 quake in that city that killed thousands. And that's the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again right here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.